Recently, I made a video called 1 year with the Fujifilm X-Pro 3, and in this video, I said I was considering switching to Sony. And I stuck by that, and now I have my new camera, the Sony A7iii. In fact, I've had it and been shooting with it the past couple weeks. So that is why I'm making this video, to tell you guys how I feel about the switch. These past few weeks, I haven't had any shoots planned, so I don't actually have any experience in that category. However, I have been using the camera most days and I've got experience shooting everyday and family things. Anyway, now that that's cleared up, I'll tell you what I think about the Sony A7iii in 2023. One of my favourite things that I found out about this camera are how great the files are. I find that I don't have to do much post-production at all to get the photos to how I like them. Whereas using my X-Pro 3, I struggled with the files. I think this is just me individually, but I found that Fujifilm's files, not the GFX, but the X-Pro 3 and the crop sensor lineup, are a bit more difficult to edit than other photo files. But I think that's just me. I think other people will definitely disagree with that. Anyway, the colours are great and the dynamic range is excellent. Some people say that Sony colours are really inaccurate, but I find that they are pretty accurate, just a little bit more vibrant than real life. But that's not a bad thing. Like I said, the dynamic range is excellent. It's really easy to get shadow information back into these photos and highlight information as well. I would say that it's almost as good as my Fujifilm GFX. I do, however, think the white balance is a little bit off. All of my photos seem a little bit too warm or a little bit too cold, but it's not that big of a problem as it's really easy to fix in post-production. And it's not the worst thing either, since I do like my photos to be that little bit warmer than what they appear to be. So sometimes it does cut out a bit of the work for me. But for most people, if you're wanting something that's super accurate to how the scene looks, then it may be a bit of a problem for you. The second thing I really enjoy about this camera is the autofocus. Everyone knows Sony's autofocus is amazing and super fast, but I did not expect it to be this good on a camera that came out in 2018. I can't lie, I was a Fuji fanboy for a while and I never really understood why people hated on their autofocus. But after using this camera for a few weeks, I realise now how much they need to improve to get to this level. The face detect on the X-Pro 3 was okay, but compared to the A7iii, it's terrible. I'm not saying that the X-Pro 3 isn't usable, it's just nowhere near as good as like the A7iii. Also, this is the first time that I've used a camera that has animal autofocus, and while it's not as good as the people autofocus, it's still decent and you can get some like kind of sharp images every now and again. Another thing that I found out about this camera while using it is just how comfy it is. Since using my Fujifilm GFX 50S, I've realised how vital a proper grip is for usability. For instance, with my Fujifilm X-Pro 3, I could comfortably shoot with it but would struggle to hold it with one hand, and every now and again it would slip out my hands entirely to only be saved by the strap. And that's because there's just no grip on this camera. I mean there is, but it's just tiny. But with the A7iii, I could comfortably shoot with it with one hand, and I can hold it at angles that I never could with the X-Pro 3. I mean I probably could get the same angles with the X-Pro 3, but I just would not feel comfortable with it, because it just so easily slips out the hand. However, there is one thing about the comfort factor that I'm not a fan of with the X-Pro 3, and that is the space between the grip and the lens. There is barely any room for your fingers, where your fingers should be. It isn't the worst though, as you can just move your fingers a tiny bit and you still have a decent amount of grip on the camera. That's all I can really think about for the big subject, so I'll now just tell you about a few little things that I've noticed that I like and dislike about this camera. The SD cards go in a different way to literally every other camera that I've used, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. There is probably a reason why it's like that, but it's just a bit weird going from like my GFX putting an SD card straight in, or any of the cameras that I've ever used, and then using this camera and being like, oh wait, yeah, I've got to turn it around. It's not a problem at all, but I just find it a bit weird. This may just be my model since I did get mine secondhand from MPB, but I find that the shutter button is really sensitive. I find that when I'm focusing, I tend to accidentally shoot because it is just like barely any difference between focusing and shooting. And while that can be a good thing if you want to get a photo quickly, at the same time it's just like, you know, why not make it so it's like a half click then a full click instead of just like a quarter press and a half press? It's just weird. The menus are messy, but I think you could get used to them very quickly. When I first saw the menus, I didn't even want to use this camera. They were just so messy, but it took about a day and a half of usage for me to go, oh, you know what? I know where that setting is now, and I know where this thing is. And it also really is easy to set up the camera in a way to where you don't even have to go into the menus at all. So it isn't that big of a problem, and if you're considering getting a Sony but you don't want the messy menus, don't worry about it. You're going to be in them for like the first 2 days, and that is about it. You're never going to use them again after that. This is one that I was really nervous about with this camera, but the viewfinder isn't bad. I wasn't sure if I was just gaslighting myself, but I remember when I used my friend Carter's Sony, I thought the viewfinders weren't that bad. And don't get me wrong, it's not the best viewfinder. It does look a bit pixely every now and again, but it really isn't that bad, and I think most people are just over-exaggerating. Maybe they haven't even adjusted it to their eye, so that's why they think it's that bad. The battery life is also really good. It's probably the best battery I've ever used. In fact, I tried to record a video yesterday and I recorded 5 different times, probably up to like 10 to 15 minutes each time, but I just couldn't get the video right. After recording that much, in 4K, bear that in mind, I looked at the battery of the camera and it had gone down only 9%. But there is a drawback with these batteries, because they're just so big and just full of juice, they take ages to charge. When I first got this camera, it was on like 0%, so I charged it up and it took like 3.5 to 4 hours to charge, which, like, you know, isn't the worst, but it's definitely not the best. This one is really just for the lens that I've got. I've got a Samyang 35mm 1.8. I cheaped out on the lens, but it seemed really good and I was correct. The images that I've got have a really soft yet sharp look to them. It's sharp where it needs to be, but where it doesn't need to have that clinical sharpness, it gradually falls off into this really nice soft look. The lens also creates really nice bokeh, and in some situations it even looks a tiny bit swirly. And I think that's all that I can say about the camera. I've loved using it these past few weeks, and I'm looking forward to using it even more. It fits perfectly into how I'm shooting right now, but just like the X-Pro 3, that may change in the future, but until then, I will continue to love this camera. Anyway, that's the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed. Be sure to check out my last video, and make sure to check out my next one. Goodbye.